get introduced with that list of things that I currently do or that I might have done previously, and Hat was a bit flippant about introducing me as the winner of the scholarship. But if I've got to put my finger on the thing which is the most significant and impactful on my career, then hands down, that is actually the single thing. And it was for a range of reasons, opening my mind to new ideas, things that I learnt, but probably most importantly the value of connections and what you learn from other people and what you get from others. And the comment about being positive, and I think I am incredibly positive about our industry, and that has certainly come from the connections and support that I've had, starting with things like the Illinois scholarship. So the society, the members, the board, you should be incredibly proud of the things that you've done, not just for the breed and your members, but also the broader industry as well. So it really is a pleasure to be back here again and talking about the good stuff that we're doing in the industry. It's a interesting question, how are Australian beef producers positioned to feed the world? There's a short version of that which is incredibly well, and we should just crack on and get it done. Are there any questions? Because one of our challenges is that as an industry, ag in general, but also livestock production particularly, we're incredibly good at finding the bad news in the very best situation. It doesn't matter how good something is, somebody's happy to tell you how it's going to be bad. But what we forget is that there's no issue, there's no challenge, there's no problem that we actually haven't found a way through, that we haven't found a way to solve, that we haven't found, more often than not, a better solution, a better way of doing things that's actually put us in better shape than what we were prior to that challenge being presented to us. But we have this incredible ability, terrible ability, shocking, dysfunctional personality trait, where when we get presented with a problem, we jump to the dramatic worst case scenario. You just go back 12 months and there were people standing in front of gatherings like this talking about how it's not if but when we're going to have an exotic animal disease and everybody's ruined. Cold light of day, we get through the process, we work out that our biosecurity systems are actually pretty good. That's why we don't have these things already. We can strengthen them, which we did. We can be a bit better prepared, which we are. But we actually found ways to get through and in front of that. But people are able to whip us into this frenzy of concern when we're presented with a challenge. But the evidence says that we actually solve everything that is put in front of us. And what we're seeing now, the benefits, the positive, the state of our industry, is a result of the things we've done over time. So we are in incredibly good shape. The global macro drivers for our industry are incredibly positive. Demand for red meat is growing. It's going to keep growing in developed and the developing world. And Australia is incredibly well positioned to respond to that. So I'm going to talk quickly about a few things around the broader industry positioning, some of the stuff that MLA does, some of that broader industry activity, and we'll have some time for questions if anybody's got any as we go. A bit about MLA to start with. Our focus is very much about how to invest in the things that are going to make a difference. How do we actually use socialised funds on behalf of the industry to invest in stuff that's going to be helping producers to be more profitable, more sustainable and more competitive. Can't do it by ourselves. MLA is seen as quite a big target quite often, and we're a significant component of what invests in research and development and marketing. But none of the things we do actually matter if people don't apply them or take advantage of them or put them to good use. Doesn't matter how good a solution research and development comes up with. If nobody actually uses it, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how good our marketing or advertising or promotion might be. If it doesn't actually connect with the consumers and community, then it actually doesn't matter. So while we're quite a big target and focus in a lot of the discussions about what the industry is doing and what are we doing next, how we actually apply and implement those things are much more important than the things we actually invest in. We're about halfway through a 5-year strategic plan, which is connected to an industry 10-year plan, and we've just recently looked at, what are our vision and purpose, focus areas. What are the things that are important to us, and we really consciously wanted to talk about prosperity, and and how do we invest in things, how do we support things that are going to make that enduring for our industry over time, and how do we actually support the broader red meat and livestock industry, and look at this bit about world-leading outcomes that fuel competitiveness, sustainability, and producer profitability that actually set us up well to be competitive in a global environment going forward. Despite feeling like everybody expects us to do everything, our main focus is research and development and marketing, and that has a pretty broad application in what we do across the red meat sector, but the key focus area for us is around R&D and marketing, and we've got other industry organisations and structure that provide us with policy support and representative positioning. So the political advocacy for the industry doesn't sit with MLA, it sits with these guys above the line. So the meat processors on the left, and then the live export guys, and then feedlotters, grass-fed cattle, goats and sheep. And we sit in this bit down here in the service providers, despite being very much the front-end organisation. So when we think about our broader positioning as an industry and what's the opportunity for us, we're in a fundamentally different position now to what we were 10 years ago, let alone 20 or 25 years ago. And our industry and our supply chains actually respond and react differently to the way that we used to. You go back 25 years, and I picked 25 years because that's when MLA started, and it's just for a point in time. And not everything that I talk about is related directly to MLA, but we're connected to a lot of them, but it actually gives us a point in time. So you go back 25 years, and the drivers of our industry are very, very different to what they are now. So 25 years ago, we were a commodity industry, very much a commodity industry. And the things that drove our productivity and profitability were commodity drivers. And you look at the things that have changed over that period of time and why our supply chain acts differently now, and you can see the changes that we've actually made in the industry. So you go back 25 years ago, we didn't have a traceability system. We now have world's best traceability system, regardless of how excited you are about having to comply with it. We didn't have a quality assurance system. We have one of the only on-farm comprehensive quality assurance systems in the world. We've also got a feedlot quality assurance system as well. We've got really good market information, which we had a little bit of then, but not as good as what we've got now, and it can be better. We didn't have an eating quality system, so we had variable quality product, which was traded into markets on a commodity basis because we only had one free trade agreement with New Zealand. So we now have traceability, quality assurance, eating quality systems to give us a consistent quality product, market information so we know what's going on with the market on a daily basis, and we actually have 16 free trade agreements. So we now have a highly credentialed product which is consistent, which we sell into the highest value markets around the world where we have preferential access. So the drivers of the environment we're in now are very different to what they were 25 years ago. So 25 years ago, the currency changes by a cent, the prices in the sale yard change tomorrow. I'm not sure anybody could tell me, except if it's something that you're really interested in, and Matt Toll could tell us, but how much the currency varied last year. Right? 12 or 15 cents total variation, Matt, over the 12 months. Not a material impact on cattle prices at any point in time. Right? The drivers of our industry are materially different to what they were before because we have a much more sophisticated supply chain. We've got a highly credentialed product which is consistent, which we sell into markets where we have preferential access, where they're prepared to pay for our product. So the things that impact on our market are very different to what they were before. So when we look at our cattle herd, and this is where some of this stuff starts to flow through. So we look at the projections for the cattle herd in the next 3 or 4 years, and we've had this massive liquidation out of the 18-19 droughts, and you'll see how quickly it dropped off. So weather conditions were as bad as what we've seen or experienced in the history of agricultural production. But you look at the rate of gain back from that is faster than what we've ever seen before as well. Driven by a few things. Increased productivity, good seasons, right? We had really good seasons, but increased productivity and our ability to invest in things which will drive our productivity because we know we'll actually get return for those investments. Because at the same time as we're increasing our herd, we're also increasing our turnoff and we're also increasing our production. So we've increased carcass weights, we've increased the number of animals that we're turning off, but we've also increased the number of animals that we're retaining as well. And those are three things that have always been competitive historically. If we're growing the herd, generally it meant we're turning off less animals. We're now growing the herd at the same time as we're turning off more, and the animals we're turning them off at heavier weights. Now some of that's driven by feedlotting, but as much as anything, it's driven by connected supply chains where we're getting better market signals that are coming back from our end users and our customers saying these are the types of cattle that we're looking for, and we're prepared to invest in those things because we know we'll get a return for them. This is a driver of obviously our herd growth. So this female slaughter, so you look at where it was in that sort of 18, 19, 20 period and how quickly the female turn-off has reduced. But as the female turn-off's reduced, we haven't had the same reduction in our total turn-off as well. So we've been retaining more females in the herd, but we're also still turning off plenty of animals. So we look at our national cattle slaughter, and you see that it's rising faster than we've ever seen it before. So we've got the herd growing faster than we've seen before. We've actually got our turn-off rising faster as well. So we're in a materially different position to what we've been before. So why are we still getting worried about the same things that we were worried about 10 or 20 years ago? So how we actually break this cycle of the things that we get concerned about or the things that we convince ourselves are a challenge for us. Because we go back to what I was saying at the start, how well positioned are we to take advantage of the fantastic global opportunity for red meat? Incredibly well positioned because we've invested in all of these things over time and we've worked out how to actually put them into practice. So we look at where we're sitting on global cattle prices. We're obviously below the US now, but we're significantly higher than what we have been previously. And we spent a period of time where we actually had the most expensive cattle in the world. That's not a bad thing, right? For Matt, that's bad, but it's not a bad thing, right? Because there's drivers that actually get us to that point. Because there's demand for our product. There's people that will pay for what we're producing, the quality that we're producing, and it goes into supply chains that recognises the value and quality of what we're producing. There's a really interesting experience, and Matt mentioned about being a farmer for, you sort of wonder why you do so many things sometimes. But a few years ago, so 3 years ago it was, we sold some feeder steers, and they made $2,250. So most money that we could have ever imagined for a grass-fed feeder steer, crossbred, reasonably low cost of production. And about a month later, there was an article where the processors were talking about how much money they were losing per head. And they were talking about losing $300 for every animal they process, which isn't quite right. But it's the message that gets out about the disconnect between live cattle prices and processing prices. That was one of the most positive things I've ever heard. And when I say that, people always think, that's right, we hate the processors. That's actually not why at all, because we all need processors, because if we don't have processors, we're all just running really cool zoos, right? So we need processors. But for the first time, the amount of money in the supply chain was enough for everybody to do really well. Because we could take our $2,250 feeder steer and give up the $300 that the processor needs, and we're still at $1,950. We can actually give them another $100. And if the processor could make $100 on every animal, they'd never work on a Saturday because they'd have to dig holes to bury their money. Give up another $100 if you like, so there's another $100 in there for somebody else. We've still got an $1,800 feeder steer that probably costs us $750. So for the first time, we're in a position in the last 5 years where there's enough money in the supply chain for everybody to do well. What we're seeing now with cattle prices is our difficulty in working out how to manage that. Because the global macro drivers are still as strong as we've ever seen. They're as positive as we've ever seen. Global demand for red meat is going to increase between 8 and 10% across all developing and developed markets in the next 10 years. So we're going to see demand. So the amount of red meat required in the next 10 years, by the time we get 10 years down the track, it'll be 5 times our total exports. That's the additional amount of red meat required in 10 years' time. on the current global demand projections. Right, so incredibly positive environment for us. So we look at our markets, and while we've got massive diversity in our markets, so we sell to about 100 markets now, we've still got this top 4 that dominate. And again, this is a really good indication of how we get out of whack with our messaging. So Japan and US, consistently our 2 strongest markets. They're pretty volatile, but they've gone from being 80% to being about 40%. But they're consistently our 2 largest markets. Korea's come in as a number 3, number 4, and they flip-flop a bit with China. And it's interesting, the commentary around China. It looks pretty volatile, but look where it came from. You go back 10 years and we sent 3,000 tonnes to China. 2 years ago, China was actually our highest value market. But at the same time, I actually had a call from a news outlet, not obviously ACM or anybody like that, and they wanted to know what was happening to all the meat that wasn't going to China because we don't have any access to China. And luckily, I didn't recognise the number. I just took a message. I just listened to the message. So I sent him a text and said, I'm going to send you some slides, and then once you've had a look at the slides, I'll then give you a call. Because at the point where they were calling to get a story about where all this meat was going because we didn't have any access to China, China was our number 3 market and our highest value market at the time. Yet if you listen to the rhetoric about China, you would think that it's been a disaster for us. And it hasn't. It's consistently our number 3, number 4 market ever since it got there 5 years ago. So we've got to make sure we keep context around how we're positioned and what's actually happening in the markets. Things are not the same as what they were 10 or 15 or 20 years ago. They're fundamentally different. The drivers that impact on our performance and our success are fundamentally different to what they were 10 or 15 years ago. And how we actually get used to and understand that is our challenge, and how we actually respond to it is certainly our challenge. Domestic beef consumption is conscious how we're going for time. Domestic beef consumption's something that's a really common discussion area for us, and it's one of these things where it's also very emotive, because we'd like to sell more beef to our mates, and we'd love our mates to eat more of the beef that we produce, and they used to eat more of it, and now they eat less. The number 1 driver for why domestic beef consumption has gone down is price. It's 50% of the driver in people making a decision to eat less red meat. 50% of the driver. Nothing else gets above 10. Animal welfare, nutrition, anything else, sustainability, anything else you might want to think of doesn't get above 10%. 50% of the driver is price. In this period of time here, so 2003 to now, 20-year period, chicken has tripled in consumption, but their price is about the same at $5. Our price has gone up by 150%. So, as in, nearly 2.5 times. Right? So just under $10 to now $23 on average. Right? So we can get domestic consumers to eat more, provided we're prepared to sell it to them for less. One of the main reasons why our prices have gone up is because we now have international demand. We're exporting 75% of our product, and the global demand and that global price being demanded by the markets where we now have preferential access, where we're selling a consistent, highly credentialed product to higher value, more discerning consumers, is what's largely driving our price. Right, so we can get domestic consumers to eat more, we just got to sell it to them for less. I hope it's okay, but that's actually not the plan. Right? So the challenge for us is how do we actually get them feeling comfortable with the price that they're paying. And when you look at the consumer sentiment data, largely they are. They'd absolutely like it cheaper because it's a fantastic product, but their commitment to red meat is still actually really strong. The number of people looking to reduce their consumption of red meat is consistently running at about 29 or 30% of the population. And the driver, number 1 is price, and then the others are things like animal welfare, sustainability, nutrition, right? But they're much, much less than price. The number of people looking to increase consumption consistently runs at about 10%. The last year, however, it was about 15. So there was more people in the last 12 months looking to increase their consumption than what we've seen before. And the reasons why they're looking to increase their consumption: nutritional value, iron, zinc, they like eating it, They see it as convenient, which we wouldn't have thought so, 20 or 30 years ago, or 10 or 20 years ago. But there's a number of people that are still looking to increase their consumption of meat, regardless of price. Right? So we've got to be careful that we drive our interest by the right reasons and for the right reasons, by the right things. So we absolutely want to be maintaining or increasing domestic consumption if we can, but more importantly, we want people to see value in the product even though they're paying more for it. And they give us very clearly the reasons why they see value in it. But they've got a positive perception of our industry, they've got a positive perception of us as producers, and they actually see value in the product. And one of the things I want to quickly touch on is, we hear a lot about, the anti-meat brigade, and we're oversensitive to that. We are absolutely oversensitive to it. We can't be naive about it because it's real, but we are absolutely oversensitive about it. We hear somebody criticise red meat, we hear somebody talk about them or their friends becoming vegans or veggies, and we feel like it's actually running against us. Consistently, the number of vegans and vegetarians in the population runs at 7 or 8%. Hasn't changed over 11 years. Bounces around a percent per year. It went up to 9% a couple of years ago, came back to 7% last year. The really interesting fact about that, though, is that 56% of those people still eat meat. So there's only about 4% of people that are genuinely vegans and vegetarians. So there's not very many of them. And the worst thing we can actually do is talk about it publicly and actually give them more credibility and publicity than what they could actually garner or gather themselves. So we actually create more of the challenge ourselves than has been created otherwise. So we whip ourselves into a frenzy about how terrible it is that all these people aren't eating meat. Firstly, there's not very many of them. And the worst thing we can actually do is engage with them in quite often the way that we do, which actually gives them more credibility than what they can gather or create themselves. Can't be naive about it, right? We don't want to be sitting here in 10 years' time and saying, and that was a point in time when the graph got away from us. But we've got to make sure we are, we're appropriate in the way that we attack it. We've got much better value in talking to the people who support us already, the people that are positive, which is the majority. More than 90% of households regularly eat beef, more than 70% of households regularly eat lamb. Majority of people have a positive view about our industry, majority of people have a positive view about farmers and the way that we do things, about sustainability, about animal welfare. There's absolutely some noise. It'd be better if it wasn't there. We absolutely need to combat it, but we've got to be careful that we don't actually build the problem ourselves and make sure that we focus on the positives as much as we can. So looking at the global markets, we're a small player in a big pond, but we've positioned ourselves incredibly well. We hear a lot about the change in prices, and this last 12 months has been pretty volatile, of course, with the livestock price, and we hear a lot about the meat prices. But here's some context. So, average export prices have come down. So these are the average red meat export values on an annual basis, and it's come down about 19% to what it was 12 months ago, but the only time it's ever been higher than what it is now was 12 months ago. So yes, prices have come back, but they're actually still high. So back to what I was saying before about the value in the supply chain, we've now got more value being created in the supply chain than we've ever seen before, and it's how we actually work together in a more strategic way to manage out the ups and downs and how we can better spread that across the supply chain. Again, this bit about being the small fish in the big pond. Total beef production, about 70 million tonnes. We're down here at the bottom, 1.5, right? So when we think about our production, we're a small, very small player. We're a much larger proportion of the exports. So there's about 10 million tonnes of beef is traded per year, and we're a pretty significant component of that. So when you think about this one here, we're not trying to convince everybody everywhere to eat our product. We only need about 2% of the world population to be excited about what we do. We've got preferential access into some of the best, highest value markets around the world. So in simple terms, our goal is to find the 2% of the population which is the richest and hungriest. And let's actually convince them that we're the best. Right? So, and we shouldn't be ashamed about that, right? That's actually the plan. So telling the story is really important. And we quite often get questions about, what can we do? What can we do? Well, stop yelling at each other and start talking positively out into the community and to the consumers. And being more confident about the credentials of our industry. We're our own worst enemies when we think about, or when we come up with reasons why somebody should have a negative view about our industry. I reckon most of the criticisms wouldn't exist, or people wouldn't know what to criticise us with if we hadn't have given it to them to start with. So we've got such a positive, good news story to tell, and finding ways to chip away at that in every way we possibly can. There's about 215 people here today. So you do the simple maths. If we can connect to, on average, 50 or 100 or a couple of hundred, and they then connect to one or two others, you do the mathematics about how quickly we could get our message out to 10 or 20 or 30,000 people in a simple, positive way if we just point forward and be positive about our industry and the credentials which people largely support and they're looking for anyway. So we've put together some materials like the Red Meat Green Facts, and there's quite a few other things that we're investing in as well that can sort of arm all of us with the good information to tell a good story as well. And one of the things we've been learning is how we make a difference to somebody's perception of our industry and how we position ourselves more positively. And I think one of our challenges is that we're not confident in a lot of cases, we're not confident to talk to anybody unless we feel like we're fully armed, unless we have all the knowledge and we can answer every question. And quite often when we engage with someone, we feel like we've got to educate them, or we've got to tell them everything we know so that they go away best informed that they possibly can. So we run events all over the place, and one of the things we do is do events at the Royal Shows. And last year we had a site, there was a hocker that sits just above the judging rings at the Sydney Show, and we had a stand in there, and I was standing outside watching people go in to our stand. And so when they'd come in, we'd get them in and we'd engage with them, and we'd get them to do a survey, and we'd sit them down and we'd show them a video about how fantastic the industry is, and then we'd ask them what they'd learned or what they felt and get their positive views about how well they'd been informed about the industry. This need to educate people. And I was just watching the sort of people that follow that green animal path around the show. And there was this family coming along, and it was a mum and dad and some teenage kids and a young fellow looked like he was about 10. And I'm guessing they were from Western Sydney somewhere. And they looked like the sort of people that if I hadn't have been standing there and they hadn't have been walking along the path, chances are we would never have crossed paths ever in our lives. But they were very diligently following this green path. And they got to the corner, they're about to go into our site. And I was thinking, this will be interesting. And the young fellow looks up and across the road, and he goes, "Sheep!" And the whole family goes across the road, and then it just debacle from there on. They have a look at the animals, and then they just scatter. So I got a couple of things from that. So their focus and interest in animals is really important. They've got so many things on their mind that don't include agriculture. We're not the top of mind thing. They didn't turn up there thinking, I wonder about the sustainability credentials of the Australian red meat sector. I wonder what I can possibly learn about that. Well, luckily, we're here ready for you. But the more telling thing was actually how low the base is, because the sheep were actually camels. And if they had gone into our stand, we were well prepared with scientific information and reams of stuff about sustainability, animal welfare. So we think about all this stuff we want to tell people, but really, this is a cow, cows are okay, we look after them, we're good people, don't you feel better about it? Off you go to the butcher. We should be more confident about telling our story. Largely the community doesn't know that much about us anymore, and we've got such a fantastic story to tell. So how we actually arm ourselves to do that is incredibly important, and being confident to do that. So these types of materials, there's a bunch of other stuff, you might recognise a few people here. So these short videos, the telling our story and having producers tell the story, and in a very genuine, authentic way about the way that we do things and why we do it. And these sorts of things are really impactful with the community. One of the other things we're doing is using these social influencers, because when one of the things we found when we looked at our consumer research and the community research, because we have this perception that everyone's throwing rocks at us, and largely they're not. Like I was saying before, we're just oversensitive to it, and me as much or more than anybody. I get really offended when people are critical of what we do, because I know how good it is, I know how well we do things, right? One of the things we found was that in a lot of cases, it's not that people were being critical of what we're doing, we were just absent from the conversation. So they're talking about nutrition, or they're talking about agriculture, or they're talking about food production, not being critical of what we're doing, but we actually just weren't part of it. So part of what we've done is invested in these influencers. So 2 groups, above 100,000, under 100,000, and paid content, but giving them positive messages which they then share with their community to get the message out to the broader consumer and community. One of the things we often see when we put this slide up is producers like us look at it and it's like, oh, I don't know any of those people. And it's like, exactly, right? Because we're not the target market. Right? We do a really good job of talking to each other about the challenge and the solution. We've got to talk more to those out in the community and the consumers, and getting that message out is a really important part of what we try and do. And this is one of the things which we've been doing now for about 18 months, and it's working really well. So it's really positive in general. You still get the crazies on the fringes, but it's certainly something that we'll keep investing in to get that message out to the much broader community and consumer base than what we can do ourselves. There's also some really good news coming out that's scientifically supporting some of our challenges, particularly around nutrition and engagement in a balanced diet. And this Dublin summit was really important last year to get a group of scientists together which were prepared to write papers and be presenting and promoting the really positive stories and messaging about red meat and its importance in a balanced diet and the contribution that it makes to general health and the opportunity for red meat to be part of particularly the dietary solution globally. So a lot more of that information coming through is going to be really important. Need to touch just quickly on the sustainability piece, and even this morning having a chat about some of the challenge in knowledge and understanding in the sustainability space. And what's becoming clearer and clearer to me as we spend more time in this area is that there's more and more people being definitive about the problem or about the solution. And if you take nothing else away today, is that we shouldn't be being definitive about either of those things, because we're still working out exactly what the problem is, and we're absolutely still working out what the solution is. Can't ignore it, but we also have to be careful that we don't overcook where we are so far or what the challenge or solution might be. So there's a range of things happening in this space, but we're still working out, like I say, what is the challenge, and we're still working out what it is that we do with it. And just remember that humans have spent thousands of years perfecting how to have a negative impact on the environment, and we've got pretty good at it, right? So we're not going to solve the problem by the time we finish here this afternoon. We're not going to solve the problem by having a meeting or a discussion or doing a single research project. It's going to be hard. It's going to take time. And we're learning new things all the time. There was a great article in the you do this anonymously now about the media, about a agricultural media website. Eric's actually here from Beef Central, of course, talking about methane. Interestingly, the research is a couple of years old, the original piece, but we largely hadn't noticed it. But it's talking about methane. And one of the things it was talking about is that, yes, methane has this 24 times impact than other gases like CO2, but it also has a cooling effect as well, which you didn't understand very well previously. But the last couple of years, there's been quite a bit of research done that says that methane in the atmosphere, yes, it has this warming effect, but it also has a cooling effect as well. And when you net those things out, it probably reduces the impact by about 60%. Now, the challenge we have is that the opponents to methane being an issue will jump on that straight away and say, see, I told you methane didn't have any impact. Then on the other side, the people who are trying to say that everyone's going to die and the world's going to end will say, no, that doesn't matter. It still has a 24% or the 24 times impact. Neither of those options are right. What we should take from those discussions is that we're still learning. And now we learn more, or now we know more, about the impact of methane as a gas in the atmosphere, maybe we will respond a little bit differently. So being careful that we don't jump to too many conclusions about the challenge or the solution is really important. Significant investment for us is in this CN30 piece, so how can we have a path to being carbon neutral by 2030, and how can we invest in the sorts of things that will actually help us do that? One of the big advantages for the red meat sector is that Richard Norton put that stake in the ground in 2017 and said with the right policy from the decision makers and the right investment in research and development, the CSIRO report said we should be able to get to carbon neutral in 10 years' time. So 2030 was set as the goal. But what it actually did was it allowed us to actually get in front of the argument. So the red meat sector is now much more advanced and has made more progress than any other industry anywhere in the world. And the good thing about it is that we've been able to do that while we've been focusing on productivity and profitability. Because one thing we can be sure of is if we get forced into doing things to respond to government commitments around climate targets, whatever they might be, then it's going to be expensive and chances are it's going to be detrimental to our production systems. But we're actually in front of the game. And we've got this multi-pronged approach, and most importantly, we've made a massive amount of progress since that 2005 base level year, and we don't get enough recognition for this. So more often than not, the sort of questions I will get is, what's the red meat sector doing about climate change, or how worried are you about the climate change impact given livestock and their impact on the environment, and what are you doing next? The question should be, as the industry that's already reduced its contribution to the greenhouse gas emissions by 50%, what can the other industries who haven't done anything like what you guys have learn from that so they can actually follow your good example? Another one of the cases where we've got to do a better job of telling our good news story rather than being concerned about the challenge. And we have great news to tell in this space, because at the same time as we're working out how do we interact with the environment and how do we measure and manage that, we're also driving that by how do we become more profitable and productive at the same time. So how well are we positioned? We're positioned incredibly well, and we're positioned in a way that we've got a fantastic product, it's got great credentials, we provide that to customers domestically and around the world who appreciate it and are actually now starting to reward us for it. And we're investing in the sorts of things as an industry that are going to allow us to be profitable and productive, have intergenerational sustainability, and actually leave the environment in better shape. And there's not many other industries that can actually say that. Thanks.